He's hot. Hello everyone! Without wasting any time, today we're going to be diving into a comparison of two brands of watercolor using a redraw of the same screen cap from My Neighbor Totoro. The first set we'll be looking at is the one that gave me the inspiration to make this video. These are the Lowell Cornell watercolors, and if I'm not mistaken, I've had them for 10 plus years and barely touched them. I really only remember using them once. It's been so long that I can't remember where I got them or how much they were, but from a quick Google search, I can assume they were most likely under $10. This is just a beginner set you usually see kids using from Walmart or any craft store really. It's got a pretty good range of colors, but as you might have noticed, one of the little cakes was missing from my set. RIP to that cake wherever it may be. But yeah, I was rummaging through this desk where I store my really old art supplies and rediscovered this set. I'm not a watercolor expert by any means, but I do know a lot more about watercolors now than I did back then, so I was curious to see if I could make something decent using these. And then I thought it might be fun to see how these beginner paints stacked up against the best watercolors I currently have in my collection, which are the Shinhan professional watercolors I got for Christmas last year. So here we have it. I quickly whipped up a redraw of the screenshot from My Neighbor Totoro for this little test. The paper I'm using here is hot press Strathmore ready cut watercolor paper. I've used this paper in earlier videos, but it's been a good little bit since I pulled it out. I didn't tape it down because with this just being a quick, fun experiment, I wasn't really concerned about buckling. Before I started on this, I was a tad concerned about how these watercolors would behave since they are really old. I didn't think to test them beforehand, but luckily after a bit of scrubbing with my brush, they did reactivate just fine. For the most part, I tried not to do too much mixing with these colors and did my best to use them as they were. It just happened that the palette worked out well with the screenshot I chose, so that was unintentional and quite fortunate. I thought for sure that given their age, these paints would lay down extremely chalky and begin to granulate like some of the cheaper watercolors I've used recently. Interestingly enough, that was not the case. These went down fairly smoothly, albeit very light, but that's just to be expected from cheaper watercolors like these. They're not very pigmented at all, but I think there's a certain charm to the desaturated look. As a side note, I did work on these pieces interchangeably as I waited for them to dry, but I arranged the footage so you'll see each piece through to completion instead of hopping around from one to the other. I figured that might be easier to digest and make the differences between the two more evident. I'm pretty easy to please when it comes to art supplies, so my only gripe with these paints was the pigment aspect of them. I had to do a lot of layering and apply a lot of paint to get some semblance of contrast. For the grass, that kind of blue tinted emerald green was really the savior when it came to that. For some reason it was more pigmented than any other color I used in this piece, at least from this set. I think it would be impossible to get much more contrast and saturation than what I managed, as there's only so much water paper can take. If I had wanted to take this further and really add some more punch, I would definitely have to go over this with colored pencil or gouache or just better watercolors in general. I didn't do that because I wanted to showcase the watercolors as a standalone medium, with the exception of some white Posca and gel pen I use for finishing touches later on. But again, I do think there is something to this look that is soft and dreamy, and I did have fun using these and seeing what I could do with them. You can definitely make pretty art with cheaper supplies, and I quite like the end result of this piece. If you're starting out and you just want to practice without blowing a bunch of money on higher quality paints, there's definitely no shame in grabbing a basic set like this. You can still learn the basic techniques and While pricier supplies have their pros, I am of the opinion that art is mostly about technique and not so much the quality of the supplies. Unless you're looking to sell originals that require light fastness, but that's a different topic altogether. On to the second piece. This sketch was traced off the first piece, so there are some differences in the background elements as I was having a hard time seeing the lines, but yeah, not really a big deal. Again, these are the Shinhan professional watercolors, which I will have linked down below if you're interested in checking them out for yourself. Right off the bat, you can start to see the huge difference in pigment. As I was switching back and forth between these pieces, I was having a bit of trouble with the amount of paint I needed to use when it came to the Shinhan version. I would get used to really having to scrub to get paint from the cheaper set, so when it came to the Shinhan set, I would use more paint than I needed. I ended up putting on too much paint in some places and ended up having to blot up paint and water more than in the other piece. Hopefully that's something I can get used to as I get more experience with this set, because boy did my heart hurt every time I had to wipe off excess paint. A little bit of this paint really does go a long way. For this piece, I did mix paints more than I did in the first one because I wanted to get the colors as similar as I had the patience to achieve. The greens in the first set were more blue leaning, while the greens in the Shinhan set are more yellow leaning. But yes, hopefully the difference is pretty obvious here. Higher quality paints do tend to net you more pigmented colors, so you don't have to work as hard to achieve contrast. It was really fun for me to see this as well, because while I've tried a fair amount of brands and qualities of watercolor, I don't think I've ever done a straight up comparison like this. I didn't realize how big of a difference there was until I did this experiment. It was a lot easier to define shapes in the greenery as well, since these paints layer a lot better. It might just be my imagination, but I felt like the Shinhan colors also dried more true to the color they are when wet than the first set. That's a big plus because it's easier to see what level of contrast you're getting as you're working. With the first set, there were times where I thought I had finally managed to get the colors nice and dark, but as soon as they dried, they looked way lighter than I thought they'd be. That wasn't really an issue with the Shinhan colors as far as I could tell. It was really satisfying to work with these and just see everything pop so vibrantly. It's a whole different mood from the first piece and makes things look more summery and full of life. I will admit, however, that I was starting to rush a little bit with this piece because I was getting tired, so I didn't give it as much time to dry. You'll notice the difference mostly in the shading on the blue character, as the lines aren't as crisp as I managed to get them in the first piece. This wasn't the paint's fault, it was mine for not giving it ample drying time before adding another layer. That aside, I still love how this turned out, and I don't have much more to say about these paints other than that if you have a bit of watercolor experience and are ready to move on from cheaper practice paints, this set is a nice step up. Professional is in the name, but I've heard these classed as student grade and I don't know enough to comment on that in depth, but the point is that while they are pricier than beginner sets, they are more affordable than the really high-end brands. I've yet to try said brands myself, but after doing this comparison, I'm pretty pleased with the quality of these, and you do get what you pay for in a good way. At the time I got these, they were running around $25, and at the time of making this video, they seem to be out of stock at that price point on Amazon, but again, I'll have them linked anyways in case that changes. Once I get more experience with these, I'd love to try a tier above this brand, whatever that may be. If you're interested in seeing another comparison video once that happens, let me know, and I'd also love to hear any suggestions for better quality brands to try in the future if you happen to know of any. here I added the finishing touches to both pieces, which was to grab my Posca and gel pens to add in little hints of flowers. The paint was still a bit wet, so this didn't work out too well, but you know, I tried. Maybe I'll go back and make those brighter now that the pieces are fully dry, and yeah, like I said, I didn't want to do too much with these as far as other mediums, since I wanted the watercolors to speak for themselves. I'm pretty pleased with how they turned out without the extra steps. So that's it for this one. I enjoyed making this video and seeing the differences in these two tiers/brands of watercolors. I think both versions came out super cute, and I hope you all had fun seeing this comparison as well. Let me know which one you like better in the comments. Once again, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all on the next one.